A decision that changed everything. Andrew Miller stood by the window of his modest one-bedroom apartment, watching the early morning sun bathe the city in golden hues. The familiar weight of responsibility pressed against his chest, but today it carried a different kind of intensity. Today, he would do something that would change his life forever. His phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, breaking the silence. He picked it up and saw a message from his old friend, Hall. "Paul, hey man, you coming to the game tonight? We haven't seen you in months." Andrew sighed. It wasn't that he didn't want to go. It was that his life had taken a different path, one that most of his friends couldn't understand. He hesitated for a moment before typing out a response. "Andrew, can't tonight. Got something important going on." He set the phone down and rubbed his temples. He wasn't ready to explain it yet. Not to them. Not to anyone. A past that shaped him. Andrew wasn't born into privilege. He knew what it meant to be abandoned, to grow up without the love of a family. He had spent years in foster homes, bounced around from place to place, each time hoping for a miracle that never came. His parents had left him at Hope Haven when he was just 7, promising they'd return. They never did. It was Miss Martha, the kind and firm caretaker at the orphanage, who had taught him resilience. She was the one who told him that life had other plans, and sometimes the greatest blessings came from the most unexpected places. Still, he had dreamed of a different future. He wanted to become a doctor, to heal people, not just physically, but emotionally. He had made it all the way to his final year of medical school before reality hit him like a freight train. His tuition money ran out, and no bank would grant him another loan. He was forced to walk away from his dream. Instead, he had turned to social work, determined to help kids who, like him, were searching for a place to belong. It wasn't the prestigious career he once envisioned, but in many ways, it was more fulfilling. And now, it was about to lead him to something even greater. The girls no one wanted. Margaret, the adoption coordinator at Hope Haven, had called him into her office the day before. Her tired eyes had given away her stress before she even spoke. "Andrew," she had said, placing a folder in front of him. "We have a problem." She opened the file to reveal 4 nearly identical faces. They were 12 years old, beautiful, bright-eyed, and full of potential. But there was something tragic in their gazes, something Andrew recognized all too well. "These girls came in last month," Margaret continued. "Quadruplets. Their mother passed away from an illness. There are no known relatives who can take them." Andrew frowned. "They're still here. I thought kids their age usually get adopted quickly." Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. "Normally, yes. But they're black." Andrew's chest tightened. He had seen this before, had felt it in the way people overlooked certain kids in favor of others. Hope Haven had seen a dozen couples come through recently, yet not a single one had even considered adopting the quadruplets. Margaret lowered her voice. Some families actually walked out when they learned that the only available children were black. Andrew clenched his fists. "That's disgusting." "I know," Margaret whispered. "And it breaks my heart because these girls, they deserve love just as much as anyone else." Andrew stared at the photos. The girls had their arms around each other, as if they knew they were all they had in the world. A spark ignited in his chest, the same way it had when he first decided to become a social worker. He looked up at Margaret, his decision already forming before he could stop it. "I want to meet them." Meeting the quadruplets. The nursery was quiet when Andrew stepped inside. The walls were painted in soft pastels, and the scent of baby powder lingered in the air. The 4 girls sat on a small couch, huddled together, their matching braids cascading over their shoulders. They looked up when he entered, their dark brown eyes filled with curiosity and caution. Andrew knelt in front of them. "Hi," he said gently. "My name's Andrew." The youngest of the 4. He only knew this because of the file. Tilted her head. "Are you here to adopt someone?" The question made his breath hitch. He had come into this thinking he would find them a family. But the moment he looked into their faces, he realized something that scared him more than anything. He already knew who their family was supposed to be. His heart pounded. I don't know yet. The eldest of the four, Sarah, studied him carefully. Most people don't even look at us, she said, her voice steady but filled with quiet pain. They come in, look around, and leave. Andrew swallowed hard. That's not fair, he said. It's not right. Sarah shrugged. It is what it is. It wasn't just her words that hit him. It was the way she said them, as if she had already accepted that the world would never be kind to them. No, that wasn't okay. You deserve a family, Andrew said firmly. Every single one of you. Emma, the second oldest, shifted. Then why does no one pick us? Andrew hesitated. He wanted to tell them that people were blind, that their rejection had nothing to do with the girls and everything to do with their own ignorance. But these were children. They shouldn't have to carry that burden. Instead, he smiled. Maybe they weren't the right family. The girls exchanged glances, clearly skeptical. Andrew took a deep breath. How about this? Tomorrow, I'll come back. We'll spend the day together, just us. Lucy, the third sister, narrowed her eyes playfully. Like a test. Andrew chuckled. Something like that. Rachel, the quietest of the four, spoke for the first time. What if we fail? Andrew's heart squeezed. He reached out, placing a hand on hers. You can't fail, he said. Not with me. For the first time, the girl smiled. And just like that, his decision was sealed. A leap of faith. That night, Andrew lay awake in his tiny apartment, staring at the ceiling. His mind raced through 100 different possibilities, 100 different fears. Could he really do this? Raise 4 children as a single man? His salary barely covered his own expenses. The world would judge him, call him foolish, say he was making a mistake. But then he thought of the girls, their hesitant smiles, their cautious hope, the way they clung to each other because no one else had fought for them. He would fight for them. With that, Andrew grabbed his phone and dialed Margaret's number. She answered on the first ring. Andrew. He took a deep breath. I want to adopt them. Margaret was silent for a moment, and then she exhaled softly. Are you sure? This isn't going to be easy. Andrew's heart pounded, but his voice was steady. I don't care how hard it is, he said. They need a home, and I want to be the one to give it to them. Margaret's voice wavered with emotion. Then let's get started. Andrew closed his eyes, bracing himself for the journey ahead. He had no idea what the future would hold. But for the first time in his life, he was exactly where he was meant to be, a family in the making. Andrew sat across from Margaret in her small, cluttered office at the orphanage. The scent of old paper and coffee lingered in the air as the afternoon sun streamed through the window, casting golden patches on the wooden floor. She peered at him over the rim of her glasses, studying him as if she could see straight into his soul. Andrew, she said slowly, folding her hands over the file that held all the legal paperwork for the quadruplets. I want to make sure you understand what you're taking on. This isn't a temporary arrangement. It's a lifetime commitment. I know, Andrew said, though his heart was pounding in his chest. I've thought about this all night. I want to adopt them. I want to give them the home they deserve. Margaret sighed, removing her glasses and rubbing her temples. I don't doubt your heart, Andrew. I never have. But let's be practical. You're a single man. You work long hours. Raising one child alone is a challenge, but 4. She shook her head. That's a mountain. Andrew leaned forward, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. I know it won't be easy, but I was one of these kids, Margaret. I know what it's like to feel unwanted. I won't let that happen to them. Margaret was silent for a moment. Then she opened the file and picked up a pen. All right, she said. Let's begin. The first hurdle. The system stands in the way. What followed was weeks of endless paperwork, interviews, background checks, and financial assessments. Andrew was grilled about his income, his living situation, his support system, or lack thereof. One social worker, a stiff-looking woman in a beige suit named Linda, studied him with skepticism during their interview. "Mr. Miller," she said, flipping through his file, "you're unmarried, you live in a one-bedroom apartment, and your annual income is, well, it's not exactly substantial. You don't have extended family to assist you. How do you intend to support 4 children?" Andrew clenched his jaw. He had been expecting this. "I'll make it work. I'm already looking for a second job, and I plan to move into a bigger apartment. I'll do whatever it takes." Linda tapped her pen against the table. "Love is important, Mr. Miller, but these children need stability. Can you guarantee that?" "I can," he said firmly. "I may not have everything right now, but I'll fight for them." "Isn't that what being a parent is about?" She pursed her lips but didn't respond. Instead, she jotted something down in her notes. Days passed in a blur of phone calls, interviews, and sleepless nights. Andrew fought harder than he ever had in his life, and every time he felt himself doubting. He thought of the girls, Sarah's guarded resilience, Emma's quiet hope, Lucy's fierce determination, and Rachel's soft vulnerability. They had been rejected too many times. He wouldn't let the system fail them now. Breaking the news to the girls, the day Andrew received the final approval, was one he would never forget. He sprinted down the orphanage hall, his heart hammering as he reached the common room where the girls sat. "Girls," he said, his voice breathless with excitement. They all looked up at him, their dark eyes full of curiosity. He took a deep breath. "You're coming home with me." There was silence, stunned, disbelieving silence. Then, like a dam breaking, the room filled with joyful screams. Emma threw herself at him first, wrapping her small arms around his waist. The others followed, their laughter ringing through the halls. "Really?" Sarah asked, her voice breaking. "You mean it?" Andrew knelt down, looking them all in the eyes. "I mean it. You're my daughters now." Rachel wiped at her eyes, her hands trembling. "We have a home," she whispered. Andrew hugged them all tighter. "Yes," he said, "you have a home. Moving in, a home built with love." The apartment wasn't perfect, it was small, and they had to make do with bunk beds and limited space, but it was theirs. The first few weeks were a whirlwind of adjustments. Andrew quickly learned that raising 4 preteen girls wasn't just about providing food and shelter, it was about understanding. "Dad, she took my hairbrush," Emma shrieked one morning. "I did not," Lucy shot back. "She lost hers and now she's blaming me." Andrew sighed, already exhausted at 6 in the morning. "We'll get extra brushes." Everyone calmed down. He had to teach them things, like how to budget, how to do laundry, how to navigate their emotions in a world that hadn't always been kind to them. And they, in turn, taught him what it meant to be a father. One evening, after a particularly long day, Andrew collapsed onto the couch with a groan. The girls were in their room, giggling over something. He could hear their whispers through the thin walls. Then the door creaked open, and Sarah peeked out. "Dad?" He looked up. "Yeah, sweetheart." She hesitated, then walked over and sat beside him. I just wanted to say thank you." Andrew swallowed the lump in his throat. "For what?" She shrugged. "For choosing us. No one ever did before." Andrew pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I didn't choose you," he said softly. "We chose each other. The world's judgment. Not everyone was as accepting of their new family." At the grocery store, an older white woman eyed Andrew suspiciously as the girls helped him load groceries into the cart. "They're not yours," she muttered under her breath. Andrew clenched his jaw. He had spent his entire life ignoring comments like that. But now his daughters were watching. He turned to the woman, his voice calm but firm. "They're mine where it matters." Other times, it was subtler. The stares, The whispered conversations behind his back, the questioning looks at school. But the hardest part was when the girls started noticing. "Why do people look at us like that?" Lucy asked one evening. Andrew sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Because some people don't understand that love isn't about skin color." Emma frowned. "That's stupid." Andrew chuckled. Yeah, it is. But no matter what the world threw at them, they faced it together. A father's sacrifice. Andrew worked harder than ever before, picking up extra shifts at a restaurant and doing late-night janitorial work. He barely slept. But every time he came home to see their school projects taped to the fridge, their smiles lighting up the apartment, he knew every sacrifice was worth it. One night, after an exhausting double shift, he came home to find the girls sitting at the kitchen table, a single cupcake with a candle in the center. "What's this?" he asked, confused. Sarah grinned. "You forgot your birthday." Andrew blinked. His birthday. He had been so busy keeping them fed, keeping a roof over their heads, that he had completely forgotten. Rachel hugged him. "Happy birthday, Dad." He sat down, stunned, as the girls started singing. The exhaustion in his body melted away as he realized he wasn't alone anymore. More than enough. There were hard days, days when money was tight, when exhaustion threatened to consume him, when the world made them feel like they didn't belong. But there were also good days, great days, like when Emma won an art competition, or when Lucy aced her science test, or when Sarah wrote a beautiful essay about her father, or when, one evening after a long, exhausting day, Rachel crawled into his lap, rested her head against his chest, and murmured, "I love you, Daddy." And in that moment, Andrew knew he wasn't just enough for them. He was everything they needed. Love isn't always enough, but it's a start. Andrew thought he knew exhaustion before. Working long hours as a social worker, balancing paperwork, dealing with heartbreaking cases, he had assumed that was the peak of tiredness. He had been wrong. Being a single father to 4 growing girls was an entirely different level of exhaustion. It was constant. Morning, noon, and night. There were no breaks, no clocking out. The moment he stepped into the apartment, he wasn't Andrew Miller, social worker. He was Dad. And Dad had a million things to do. Growing pains and unexpected challenges. The first few months had been full of excitement and adjustments, but soon reality set in. The girls were growing, and with growth came change, physical, emotional, and personal. One evening, Sarah stormed into the kitchen, her face flushed with anger. "I hate my hair," she declared, slamming her backpack onto the table. Andrew, who had been chopping vegetables for dinner, blinked in surprise. "Oh, okay. Want to tell me why?" Sarah huffed, crossing her arms. "All the girls at school have straight hair. Their ponytails swing when they walk. My hair just stays." Andrew set down the knife and turned to face her fully. "Your hair is beautiful, sweetheart." Sarah's eyes burned with frustration. "You have to say that. You don't get it." Andrew's heart clenched. She was right. He didn't get it. No matter how much he loved them, he would never fully understand what it meant to grow up as a black girl in a world that constantly favored Eurocentric beauty. He exhaled slowly. "You're right. I don't get it. But that's why I need you to tell me. Help me understand." Sarah hesitated. I just want it to be easier." Andrew nodded. "Okay, then let's figure this out together." The next day, he took her and her sisters to a black-owned hair salon in town. The moment they stepped in, Sarah's shoulders relaxed. The air smelled like coconut oil and shea butter, and the walls were lined with pictures of beautiful women rocking every kind of natural hairstyle. A stylist with long locks and a warm smile crouched to Sarah's level. "What are we doing today, sweetheart?" Sarah swallowed. I don't know." The stylist glanced at Andrew, then back at Sarah. "Let's start with something simple. Maybe some box braids. It'll be easy to manage and still stylish." Sarah's face lit up. "Really?" "Really," the stylist said. "And next time, we can try something different. You've got options, honey." Watching Sarah sit in the chair, her confidence growing with every twist of her braids, Andrew felt a knot of emotion in his chest. There were things he couldn't teach them, but he would always find people who could. The world wasn't always kind, but they had each other. No matter how much Andrew loved his girls, the world wasn't always kind. It started with subtle things, the way cashiers would glance between him and the girls, hesitating before asking, "Are they yours?" It escalated to outright ignorance. At the grocery store one afternoon, Andrew was comparing prices on cereal when an older white woman approached with a tight-lipped smile. "Are you their teacher?" she asked, nodding at the girls who were arguing over which brand of cookies to buy. Andrew turned, his smile polite but firm. "No, I'm their father." The woman's smile froze. Oh. Her eyes flicked back to the girls, then back to him. "That's nice of you." Andrew clenched his jaw. Nice of him. As if he was doing charity work, rather than raising his children. He knew it wasn't worth arguing with every ignorant person, but what stung was the way the girls noticed. Later that night, Rachel curled up beside him on the couch, picking at the hem of her pajama sleeve. "Why do people look at us funny, Daddy?" she whispered. Andrew sighed. "Because they don't understand." Rachel frowned. "Understand what?" "That love doesn't have a color," he said. "But that's their problem, not ours." Rachel seemed to think about that for a moment before nodding. "Okay," she said. "Can we have pancakes for breakfast?" Andrew smiled, ruffling her curls. "Absolutely." They couldn't change the world overnight, but they could keep loving each other anyway. The breaking point, when love wasn't enough. As much as he tried to hold everything together, the cracks started to show. Andrew was exhausted. Between his full-time job, his part-time shifts at the grocery store, and making sure the girls had everything they needed, he had barely slept in weeks. One evening, after a particularly long and stressful day, Andrew was struggling to cook dinner when the girls started bickering over the TV remote. "I had it first," Lucy shouted. "No, you didn't," Emma shot back. "You always take it." "Girls," Andrew warned, stirring the pot of spaghetti. "You're so bossy," Rachel snapped at Lucy. "I wouldn't have to be if you listened." "Enough." Andrew's voice boomed across the room. Silence. The girls froze, their eyes wide. Andrew exhaled sharply, running a hand over his face. He hated yelling at them. His voice softened. "I'm sorry. I need you to help me out, okay? I'm trying my best here." The girls exchanged guilty looks. Sarah, always the leader, walked over and hugged him. "We know, Dad." The others followed, wrapping their small arms around him. "We love you," Emma whispered. Andrew swallowed past the lump in his throat. He might not always get it right, but they were in this together. A little help from an unexpected source. Andrew realized something that night. He needed help. The next morning, he called the one person he had been avoiding. "Margaret," he said when she picked up. "I can't do this alone." Margaret chuckled softly. "No parent can, Andrew. What do you need?" "Anything," he admitted. "Guidance, advice, a break every now and then." Margaret hummed. "I know a woman, Miss Irene. She's a retired teacher who volunteers with foster families. She might be able to help." Andrew was hesitant at first. He didn't want to feel like he was failing. But when he met Miss Irene, a warm black woman with silver-streaked hair and a firm but kind demeanor, he realized that accepting help wasn't failure. It was smart parenting. Miss Irene started visiting once a week. She helped the girls with homework, taught them to cook, and, most importantly, gave Andrew breathing room. One evening, as Andrew sat on the porch, sipping tea while Miss Irene and the girls baked cookies inside, He realized something. For the first time in months, he didn't feel like he was drowning. He felt like he had a village. The strength of a family. As the months passed, things got easier. Not because life magically became perfect, but because they learned how to navigate it together. Sarah became more confident in her skin. Emma found her voice in writing. Lucy discovered a love for science. Rachel became a fierce protector of her sisters. And Andrew became the father they had always deserved. One evening, after tucking the girls into bed, he stood in the doorway, watching them sleep. He had given up medical school, his old dreams. But looking at them now, his daughters, his heart, he realized something. This was the greatest thing he had ever done. Fighting for their future. Andrew sat at the kitchen table, his head resting in his hands, as he stared at the pile of unpaid bills stacked in front of him. Rent was due in a week. The electricity bill was 2 months behind. The girls needed new clothes, school supplies, and God knew what else. He had been juggling jobs, stretching every dollar to its limit, but it still wasn't enough. He was exhausted, but giving up, that wasn't an option. Not when he had 4 daughters counting on him. When sacrifice becomes routine, Andrew had already given up everything. His social life, his free time, even his sleep. His days started at 4:30 a.m. when he woke up to prepare breakfast for the girls before waking them for school. By 6:00 a.m., he was at his job as a social worker, dealing with one heartbreaking case after another. By 5:00 p.m., he clocked out and headed straight to his second job at the grocery store, stocking shelves and running the register. By 11:00 p.m., he was home, exhausted, barely able to keep his eyes open, but forcing himself to check the girls' homework and listen to their stories about school. By midnight, he was asleep on the couch. By 4:30 a.m., it started all over again. And the worst part, he was still falling short. A letter that changed everything. One afternoon, Sarah came home from school with an envelope in her hand, her expression hesitant. "Dad?" she asked, setting her backpack down. Andrew was washing dishes, his sleeves rolled up, his fingers raw from the hot water. He glanced up, noting the serious look on her face. "What is it, sweetheart?" She handed him the letter. "It's from school, about a tuition program." Andrew wiped his hands and opened it. His heart pounded as he read. "Dear Mr. Miller, we are pleased to inform you that Sarah has been selected for the Excellence in STEM Scholarship Program. This will provide funding for her education, as well as access to mentorship and specialized coursework. Please confirm your acceptance by the end of the week." Andrew's eyes blurred as he read the words over and over again. "Dad." Sarah's voice was quiet. "Can we afford this?" Andrew looked at his daughter, this brilliant, hard-working girl who had fought against every obstacle life had thrown at her. And he realized something. He wasn't just keeping them afloat anymore. They were rising. He wrapped Sarah in a tight hug. "We're going to make this work," he whispered. "I promise you." And for the first time in a long time, he actually believed it. Facing the school board, fighting for equality. Sarah's scholarship was a blessing, but it also came with a harsh reality. Many other students like her weren't getting the same opportunities, and Andrew was tired of it. He sat in the small conference room of the local school board, facing a row of wealthy parents and school officials who were discussing the allocation of funding. One mother, a woman in a crisp white blouse and pearl earrings, sighed dramatically. "We simply don't have enough resources for everyone. We have to be selective about which students benefit." Andrew clenched his fists under the table. "You mean white students?" The room fell silent. A man in a navy blue suit cleared his throat. "Mr. Miller, these are delicate matters. We are prioritizing students who come from established backgrounds." Andrew leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "You mean privileged backgrounds. The students who already have access to tutors, extracurricular activities, and connections. You're leaving kids like mine behind." The woman in pearls gave him a condescending smile. We can't help everyone, Mr. Miller. Andrew's blood boiled. No, but you can stop making it harder. He looked around the room, his father's heart burning with determination. These kids, my kids, work twice as hard for half the chances, and you're telling me they don't deserve the same resources, the same education. If you don't give them a fair shot, who will? The silence in the room was deafening. Finally, the superintendent sighed and rubbed his temples. We'll review the policy. It wasn't a full victory, but it was a start. And Andrew, he wasn't going to stop fighting. More than just survival. Andrew's life had always been about survival, about making ends meet, about getting through the next day, the next paycheck. But one evening, something changed. The girls had just finished their homework, and Andrew was dozing off on the couch when Lucy gently shook his shoulder. "Dad," she whispered, "wake up." Andrew groaned. "Sweetheart, can this wait until morning?" Lucy giggled. "Nope." The girls dragged him to the kitchen, where a homemade cake sat on the table. It was slightly lopsided, and the frosting was uneven, but it was perfect. "What's this?" he asked, blinking in confusion. Emma grinned. "It's a celebration." "For what?" Rachel wrapped her arms around him. "For you. For being the best dad ever." Sarah placed a small folded paper in front of him. "And for this." Andrew opened it and froze. It was a college application. For him. "We know you had to leave school," Sarah said softly. "But you don't have to give up on your dreams. We found an online program. You can study at night." Andrew stared at them, his heart too full for words. "You always take care of us," Emma said. "Now we want to take care of you." Andrew's throat tightened. He looked at his daughters, his world, his reason for everything. And for the first time in years, he allowed himself to dream again. A future worth fighting for. The next morning, Andrew sat at his small desk, filling out his own college application while his daughters did their homework beside him. It wouldn't be easy, but nothing worth having ever was. As he signed the last page, he looked up at his girls. "Thank you," he whispered. They smiled, knowing. He had spent so long believing he was saving them. But the truth was, they had saved him too. The price of fighting for a future. Andrew sat at his small, rickety desk, staring at the college application his daughters had given him. His name was already neatly written at the top, the forms filled out with remarkable precision. His girls had done this. For him. His heart swelled with pride, but also with fear. How could he balance work, parenting, and going back to school? The thought of failing terrified him. But then he glanced at his daughters, Sarah deep in her textbooks, Lucy experimenting with a science project at the kitchen table, Emma doodling in her notebook, Rachel humming softly while flipping through a novel. They had worked so hard for their dreams. How could he not do the same? Taking a deep breath, he picked up his pen and signed the form. For the first time in years, he was no longer just surviving. He was moving forward. Sacrifice comes at a cost. Andrew submitted his application and was accepted into an online college program for social work. The coursework was rigorous, and the hours were brutal. His routine became even more demanding. Wake up at 4:30 a.m., make breakfast, wake the girls, and help them get ready for school. 6 o'clock a.m., 5 o'clock p.m. Social work shift. 5:30 p.m., 10 o'clock p.m. Second job at the grocery store. 10:30 p.m., 2 o'clock a.m. Online classes, coursework, and assignments. 2:30 a.m., 4:30 a.m. Sleep, if he was lucky. The exhaustion was unlike anything he had ever experienced. He drank more coffee than he cared to admit. His body ached. His head throbbed constantly. But when he saw the way his daughters looked at him, with admiration, with pride, with love, he knew there was no other option. This was for them. And for himself. The breaking point. When everything fell apart. One night, after weeks of sleepless nights, Andrew was at work stocking shelves when his vision blurred. He blinked, trying to shake the dizziness. Then, suddenly, darkness. He collapsed. When he woke up, he was lying on a hospital bed, an oxygen mask strapped to his face. Panic surged through him. Where were the girls? A nurse leaned over him, gently pressing a hand to his shoulder. "Mr. Miller, you need to rest. You collapse from exhaustion and dehydration." "I have to go," Andrew rasped, trying to sit up. "My daughters." "They're fine," a familiar voice said from the doorway. "Margaret." The moment he saw her, his chest loosened. "They're at home with Miss Irene," she said, walking to his bedside, her expression filled with worry. "Andrew, what the hell are you doing to yourself?" He swallowed, his throat dry. "I had to. They need me to." Margaret shook her head, cutting him off. "Andrew, they don't need you to kill yourself trying to be everything at once. They need you alive." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. Tears burned behind his eyes. He had been so focused on providing for them, on making sure they had everything, that he had forgotten the most important thing: being there for them, not just as their provider, as their father. Coming home to the people who matter most, Andrew was discharged the next day. When he walked through the door, the girls rushed to him, their eyes wide with concern. "Daddy," Rachel sobbed, wrapping her small arms around his waist. "Are you okay?" Emma clung to his arm. "We were scared." Lucy wiped her eyes, looking angry. "Why didn't you tell us you were pushing yourself too hard?" Sarah, always the strong one, just stared at him, her hands balled into tight fists. "You scared us, Dad," she whispered. "You scared me." Andrew sank to his knees, pulling them all into a tight embrace. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I should have told you. I should have let you help." Rachel sniffled. "We don't need things, Daddy. We need you." Andrew's heart shattered. He had spent so long trying to be the perfect provider that he had forgotten. They didn't need perfection. They just needed him. Finding a balance. After the hospital scare, Andrew made changes. He cut back on extra shifts. He accepted help from Miss Irene and Margaret. He started taking care of himself, sleeping more, eating better, and spending more time with the girls. And something incredible happened. The stress didn't disappear, but life felt lighter. The girls thrived in school. Andrew thrived in his classes. They laughed more. They spent more time together. Movie nights, game nights, walks in the park. And one evening, as they sat around the kitchen table, just talking, just being together, Andrew realized this was the life he had always wanted. Not the fancy career, not the big salary, not the picture-perfect house. This family, this love, this home. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. And for the first time in his life, Andrew was truly happy. A father's legacy. Months passed. Andrew completed his first semester in college. The girls excelled in school. And one day, Sarah came home with an acceptance letter to a prestigious STEM program. Andrew stared at the letter, his throat tight. "Dad," Sarah asked hesitantly, "are you proud of me?" Andrew pulled her into a hug. "Sweetheart," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I've never been prouder of anything in my life." And as he looked at his daughters, his world, his reason for everything, he knew. The struggles, the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, it had all been worth it. Because they weren't just surviving anymore. They were thriving. And they always would. The strength of a family. Andrew had never been the type of man to cry easily. He had spent most of his life pushing through, swallowing his emotions, refusing to let the weight of the world break him. But as he stood in the doorway of their small but warm apartment, holding Sarah's acceptance letter to one of the top STEM programs in the country, he felt his eyes burn with unshed tears. His little girl, the same girl who once doubted her worth, who had watched family after family pass her by, had just been accepted into a program that would change her entire future. Sarah stood across from him, nervously biting her lip. "Dad, is it real?" she whispered. "Did I actually make it?" Andrew let out a shaky laugh. He walked over, placed his hands on her shoulders, and looked into her deep brown eyes. "You didn't just make it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You earned it." And just like that, Sarah broke into tears, throwing herself into his arms. The other girls rushed into the kitchen, their voices excited and full of joy. "You did it, Sarah. We knew you could. This is huge." Andrew held onto her tightly, feeling his heart swell with pride. He had fought tooth and nail to give his daughters the life they deserved. And now, they were proving to the world that they belonged. The hardest decision of all. As much as Sarah's acceptance was a dream come true, it also brought a new challenge. Her program was across the country. Andrew tried to hide his pain when she broke the news at dinner. "It's in California," she said hesitantly, her fork pushing at her mashed potatoes. "I'd have to move. Next month." Rachel, Lucy, and Emma froze. "Move?" Rachel whispered. "You mean leave?" Emma asked, her voice small. Andrew's chest tightened. He had spent years keeping his daughters close, protecting them, making sure they never felt alone again. And now one of them was about to leave the nest. "That's amazing, sweetheart," he said, forcing a smile. "This is what you've been working for." Sarah nodded slowly, but Andrew saw the hesitation in her eyes. She was excited, but she was scared too. Because as much as she wanted to go, she didn't want to leave her family behind. Preparing for change. Over the next few weeks, the entire apartment became a whirlwind of preparation. College applications turned into dorm checklists. Late-night study sessions turned into packing sessions. Excitement mixed with heartache. The other girls were supportive, but Andrew could tell that the idea of losing Sarah weighed on them heavily. One evening, he found Lucy sitting outside on the porch, staring at the sky. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, sitting next to her. Lucy sighed. "It won't be the same without her." "I know," Andrew admitted, "but this is what she's worked for. And she's not leaving us, Lou. She's just going on a new adventure." Lucy played with the hem of her sweater. "What if she forgets us?" Andrew's heart ached. He reached over, gently tucking the stray curl behind her ear. "That's not possible," he said softly. "No matter where she goes, we'll always be her family." Lucy nodded, but she still looked uncertain. The night before goodbye, the night before Sarah was set to leave, the family gathered in the living room, their voices hushed. "Do you have everything?" Andrew asked, checking her bags for the 10th time that night. Sarah laughed. "Dad, yes. I promise." The atmosphere was bittersweet. They all knew this moment was coming, but knowing it didn't make it any easier. That night, Sarah didn't sleep in her bed. Instead, she curled up next to her sisters, the way they had when they were little. Rachel, Lucy, and Emma stayed up talking, whispering memories, making promises to call every day. And Andrew. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at the family photo hanging on the fridge, trying to come to terms with the fact that his little girl was growing up. The airport goodbye. The morning of Sarah's departure was quiet. The ride to the airport was filled with small conversations, but there was an unspoken heaviness in the air. When they arrived, Sarah turned to her sisters, her eyes shimmering with emotion. "You guys better not replace me," she joked. Rachel smirked. "No promises." Lucy hugged her the longest, and Emma wiped away a tear before grinning up at her big sister. Then Sarah turned to Andrew. He had promised himself he wouldn't cry. But when she threw her arms around him, whispering, "I love you, Dad. Thank you for everything," he felt the tears escape anyway. "You make me so proud," he whispered into her hair. "Go change the world." Sarah pulled back, nodding through her own tears, then picked up her bags and walked toward the gate. And just like that, she was gone. adjusting to life without her. The apartment felt quieter without Sarah. Andrew caught himself setting the table for 5 instead of 4. Her bed remained untouched, her favorite books still stacked on her nightstand. The girls missed her fiercely, especially Lucy, who had always been closest to her. "She'll be back for the holidays," Andrew reminded them. But even he had to admit, it felt strange. For the first time in years, the family was missing a piece. The call that changed everything. 2 months after Sarah left, Andrew was cleaning up after dinner when his phone buzzed. Sarah's name flashed across the screen. "Hey, sweetheart," he answered, drying his hands. There was a pause on the other end. "Dad?" Sarah's voice was shaky. "Can you come visit?" Andrew's stomach dropped. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," she said quickly. I miss you. I miss home." Andrew exhaled, his heart clenching. She was doing great in school, but she was homesick. She had never been away from her family before. He smiled softly. "I'll be on the next flight." And just like that, he was on his way to her, reuniting in a new chapter. When Andrew arrived at Sarah's campus, he found her waiting outside her dorm, tears in her eyes. She didn't say anything. She just ran into his arms. "You're okay," he whispered, holding her tight. "I've got you." And in that moment, he realized, no matter where they went, no matter how much time passed, no matter how many miles separated them, they would always find their way back to each other. Because they weren't just a family. They were a forever family. A love that lasts forever. Andrew had always known that time moved fast. But nothing could have prepared him for how quickly his daughters were growing up. Sarah was thriving in her college program. Lucy was preparing for her own university applications. Emma was turning into a talented artist, with her sketches filling up every inch of their home. Rachel had discovered a passion for public speaking, joining the debate team and winning competitions. Their lives were moving forward. And Andrew? He was still adjusting to the fact that they didn't need him in the same way anymore. The quiet house syndrome. When Sarah left for college, the house felt quieter. But when Lucy started touring universities, when Emma began spending more time at her art studio, and when Rachel was off practicing for her next debate, the silence became deafening. One evening, Andrew sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chairs. There had been a time when this home was bursting with noise, laughter, and endless demands for snacks. Now, it felt still, almost too still. A father's restlessness. Without realizing it, Andrew started working later than usual. The case files at his social work office started piling up, and instead of pushing them to the next day, he took them home. Margaret noticed first. "You're burning yourself out again," she told him one afternoon, leaning against his office door. Andrew shrugged. "Just keeping busy." Margaret studied him carefully. "Andrew, you've spent your entire life taking care of those girls. Now that they're growing up, have you thought about what you want for yourself?" He opened his mouth to answer, then paused. What did he want? For years, his life had revolved around his daughters. But now, they were becoming independent, and he was left wondering where that left him. The moment everything changed. One weekend, while Sarah was home visiting, Andrew walked into the living room and found his daughters whispering excitedly. The moment they saw him, they gasped and tried to hide something. Andrew raised an eyebrow. "All right, what are you all up to?" Emma grinned. "We planned something for you." Rachel nodded. "You always take care of us. So now it's your turn." Lucy handed him an envelope. "Open it." Andrew hesitated, then carefully tore it open. Inside was a plane ticket. To Paris. His eyes widened. "What is this?" Sarah beamed. "You've always wanted to go. You used to talk about it when we were kids." Andrew shook his head in disbelief. "Girls, I can't afford." "It's already paid for," Emma said, winking. "We all chipped in." His throat tightened. For years, he had sacrificed everything for them. Now, They were giving something back to him. A new adventure. For the first time in his entire life, Andrew did something for himself. He took the trip, and it was incredible. Walking through the streets of Paris, sitting in a cafe with no responsibilities hanging over his head, watching the sun set over the Seine River, Andrew realized something. For so long, he had been afraid of what life would be like when his daughters grew up. But now, he understood. This was the next chapter, and it was just as beautiful. Coming home to what matters most. When he returned, the girls greeted him with hugs and eager questions about his trip. For the first time in years, Andrew felt like he had truly lived for himself. But as much as he had loved Paris, as much as he had cherished the freedom, nothing felt as good as being home. His daughters, his family, his forever, a love that never ends. Years later, when Andrew walked Sarah down the aisle at her wedding, when he sat in the audience and watched Lucy give her university graduation speech, when Emma held up her first published art book, when Rachel won a national debate competition, he realized something. He had done it. He had raised them. He had given them everything. And in return, they had given him a love that would last a lifetime. Because family wasn't about blood. It was about choice, and he would choose them 1,000 times over. Every single time. Forever. The final lesson. One evening after dinner, Andrew sat with his daughters on the front porch, looking up at the stars. Rachel rested her head on his shoulder. "You know, Dad, we got lucky." Andrew chuckled. "How's that?" She smiled softly. "Because you chose us." Andrew's heart swelled. "No," he said, pulling them all close. "I'm the lucky one."